iTunes Radio. Is it radio? Is it not radio? Does it matter? Is it going to be a success? Larry Rosin knows what goes on in the United States. Is iTunes Radio going to work in Europe when it arrives, do you think, Larry?
Well, I think it'll be a factor, to be sure. Apple, of course, brings a unique set of qualities to the table. The biggest one is a long time horizon. They don't need to make money in the short term on iTunes Radio, even though it's an ad-supported, at least in America, it's ad-supported and likely to be ad-supported here when it launches. But they don't have to make money just on those ads because they can make money. They want to sell the tracks through their iTunes store, and then they want to sell their whole ecosystem, all their hardware. And so it's part of a bigger play for them. And so I do think it's likely to be a factor throughout Europe once it launches.
It's a threat for us because it's going to take listeners away from AM and FM. Well, how's that working in the US?
Well, the analogy I use is like a snow globe, where it used to be the case where if you shook the snow globe, the snow would go up, but it would all settle down inside the globe. What's happening now is it's like there's a big hole in the snow globe, and you shake it up, and the snow goes flying everywhere. But some of the snow does stay in the snow globe, and it does affect all this. You know, we have a much bigger internet radio entity called Pandora, which as of today is far bigger than iTunes Radio, and it has. We do see decreases in listening to AM/FM radio in terms of time. People still listen to radio, they're just spending less time with it as things move around. But at the same time, the total amount of time that people spend with audio is clearly increasing. So these services maybe take a little listening from radio, but they also just bring audio to places that that audio wasn't being consumed before.
I was interested in what the guy from Austria, Rudiger, was saying, because they've launched, in a sense, their own Pandora or iTunes, branded with the name of their radio station. That's quite an interesting way of marketing your brand in that different space.
I think it's the right thing to do. I think that people there's a reason they're growing in the United States, because people like it. Pandora's a really good product, and I know it's not available here, so it's hard for people to use and try, but if they did use and try it, they would see it's a really good product, and people like it for a reason. And so to say, well, instead of letting Pandora get that listing, why don't we get that listing, keep it under our tent? I think it's a brilliant idea.
It's the old thing that they teach you in American business school, isn't it, about the reason why the railroads went out of business was they thought they were in the railroad business, and they were actually in the
transportation
freight business.
Yes, and they should have gone into trucking and things like that.
And so
absolutely.
Probably Radio 1 or Capital Radio or whatever should have invented Spotify.
Quite possibly. They are who the consumer would first expect these kinds of things to come from, would be to come from broadcasters, and the broadcasters would bring out these innovations. You also know the innovator's dilemma, that it's the established company that's less likely to bring the disruption as compared to the outsider. So it's tough. I mean, it's tough, obviously, to come up with a business plan that says, let's take our listening from ourselves, from our cash cow, and yet at the same time, since we're talking about Apple, I mean, Steve Jobs saw, he could milk the iPod dry forever, but as soon as someone came out with a phone that had an iPod in it, that business was lost, so he said, we better launch it ourselves. And someone's going to come out with a tablet, and that'll steal as well, but we better launch that ourselves. The creative competition with yourself is probably the smartest long-term business strategy.
Very briefly, are you optimistic, Larry, about the future of radio?
I am generally. I do think we start to undersell the values that we do bring in. That's basically for a quarter of a century I've been researching radio listeners, and radio listeners love so many aspects of radio. They love the connections to the community, the personalities who entertain them, news, traffic, weather, the things that the fact that it's there in an emergency, that it's easy and free, and all those qualities. It's just got to get, but competition makes you better, actually. And as we're talking B-school stuff, competition's a good thing, and because it sharpens the saw and makes you stronger. And so that should be the attitude of bring it on. This will make us better, and we're going to do all the things that a good competitor does. And frankly, because of that snow globe world we've been in, a lot of people lost some of that competitive edge. So they only knew how to compete station to station, as opposed to compete for all of people's time. And that's what we have to do now, is to understand that there's other time that we need to compete for as well.
Always good to hear some fighting talk.